To me, one of the most terrifying things is space. From black holes to giant meteors to rogue planets or the inescapable vacuum, it just sends a shiver down my spine. But what about the sun? We see it pretty much daily and never think too much about it. But what if, for some unknown reason, the sun began to get closer to us, day by day, making the earth hotter and hotter until eventually it burns up everything we hold dear? Well, such is the case for today's Twilight Zone titled The Midnight Sun. The episode begins with a young woman named Norma painting the only thing she really knows anymore, the sun. It no longer seems to set, and for some unknown reason gets closer and closer to Earth, making each and every day hotter and hotter. The heat isn't the only thing people have to contend with. The water supply has been dwindling, and even something we take for granted like electricity only runs for short periods at a time.
Susie! Don't take the lady's water.
The Schuster family are packing up and leaving. Using what little gas they have left, they intend to make their way to Toronto, where they have family waiting and hopefully some reprieve from the increasing heat. This leaves Norma and Mrs. Bronson as the last two residents in their building.
I keep getting this crazy thought that I'm gonna wake up and none of this will have happened.
Either Norma is unable to come to terms with what is happening, or she truly is hopeful that maybe this is all just a nightmare. For some reason, the sun no longer seems to set, which would be an impossibility unless the Earth stops spinning or the sun was somehow spinning around at the exact same rate, which could explain why people are leaving. Maybe they're trying to reach the parts of the Earth that aren't getting the sun, but that would offer a whole host of other issues.
The store was open. Wide open.
Despite everything being on the brink of annihilation, Norma still manages to make a trip to the store. Although the store no longer had anyone working, and it was nothing but a few other desperate souls taking what they could so as not to starve. Even though we don't see Norma's trip to the store, the interesting thing is she talks about it in a more depressing manner than anything. People weren't attacking each other like you would expect in a dire situation like this. Instead, they just grabbed what they could and kept to themselves.
Fruit juice. Oh, Norma, could we open a can now?
Mrs. Bronson acts kind of erratic over a can of fruit juice Norma got at the store. Something most would take for granted, but when your water supply is only on for an hour a day, something like fruit juice almost becomes a forbidden luxury. Mrs. Bronson is beginning to crack, either from the heat or the situation itself, but Norma still keeps things as cool and as calm as she can. The radio comes on with a warning for anyone still inside the city. Because the police have been forced to deal with the overcrowding on the highways, anyone still inside should prepare to defend themselves should the need arise, as police will be unavailable to help.
Ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow you can fry eggs on sidewalks, heat up soup in the ocean, and get help from wandering maniacs if you choose.
The radio broadcaster starts going off the script, telling people exactly how it is, how hopeless and dire the situation has become, before he's pulled away from his station. For some reason, they're afraid he's going to make people panic, but if they haven't already started by now, then what are they waiting for? The power is shut off, which is becoming a more frequent occurrence as time goes by, which means things are only going to get even hotter for the two women as they no longer have their air conditioner. This starts making Mrs. Bronson panic and get even more agitated because she questions, what if it doesn't come back on? Then what will they do? She really flies off the deep end when she sees Norma's painting of the sun. Having to see that burning ball of fire in the sky day after day, and knowing their impending doom is just around the corner, she just wants to see something cool, a waterfall, trees bending in the wind, anything but the sun.
Don't paint the sun anymore!
It's starting to become so hot that even just touching the windowsill causes a burn on Norma's hand. It's also surprising that the censors allowed Norma to show off as much skin as she does. Things were very puritanical for a long time in TV, and I don't know exactly when changes began to happen, but it's kind of shocking seeing her wear something that, even though tame by today's standards, shows off so much of her figure. Norma checks on Mrs. Bronson, who appears to be getting worse as the hours go by. But they aren't alone for long, as an intruder has entered through the fire exit.
Come on out, baby. Come on out and be friendly. I ain't got all day.
The man threatens to come in the apartment, but Norma is packing the old Dirty Harry special. She pulls back the hammer and intimidates the man to leave, but before Norma even sees the man leave the building, Mrs. Bronson has already unlocked it and let the man inside. Instead of shooting, Norma struggles with the man, who was wearing a jacket for some reason, despite it getting increasingly hotter as time goes by. He drinks the remainder of Norma's water, pouring the last of it over his head.
I wouldn't hurt you. I wouldn't do you any harm.
But the man begins to come to his senses when he sees Norma's paintings. His wife was also a painter until he lost her and his baby to the heat. He did everything he could to keep them cool, but there's nothing much he really could have done. Since losing both of them, he's been wandering around desperately searching for what little water he could. He had no intention of hurting either woman and couldn't if he even wanted to, but the heat and loss of his family has made him almost of unsound mind. He ends up begging the women for forgiveness and then leaves them as he's most likely just gonna die from the heat outside.
I painted it for you last night.
Norma painted the waterfall Mrs. Bronson asked for, and just looking at it, it seems to make her even more delusional because she seems to think that it's real. For some reason, she thinks they can just go in it and swim. The heat is really just cooking her brain at this point, and after some very odd behavior at the window, Mrs. Bronson just falls over dead. The heat becomes so intense that Norma's paintings literally begin to melt. Norma too becomes overwhelmed by the extreme heat, and after one last scream, she drops dead. But suddenly, Mrs. Bronson is still alive, and it's snowing outside. Norma wakes from a high fever she was experiencing, and it looks like the whole thing was just in her head.
I had such a terrible dream. There was midnight sun.
But even though she had only dreamt about the sun getting closer and closer, and the temperature getting hotter and hotter, it looks like the exact opposite is happening. The Earth has started to drift away from the sun, getting colder and colder as time passes by, and within a few weeks, there won't be any sun left. So even though there is no more midnight sun, soon the Earth will be consumed by the darkness of space and simply freeze. The midnight sun functions similar to other Twilight Zone episodes about an impending doom, just replacing nuclear or alien attack with a catastrophic natural disaster. Even when faced with an extinction level event, for the most part, people still keep their humanity. Yes, the intruder did break in and steal the woman's water, but it was simply out of desperation, and once he realized what he was doing, he simply left. In other similar situations or films that have depicted life-ending events, it could have been a much worse situation for the two women. And unlike other media with similar themes, there is no happy ending. You do get a split second where you think things may be alright as you see the snow, but this dissipates rather quickly once you realize there is still no hope in this situation. Rod Serling wrote the episode, and in an early draft he had included 2 extra characters that were eventually cut as they either didn't really serve a purpose or just slowed down the pace of the episode. During the scene when the Schusters are leaving town, a refrigerator repairman was going to leave Mrs. Bronson's apartment after fixing her refrigerator. He asks her for $100, saying he only takes cash, to which she offers her wedding ring, which the repairman simply turns down because in this situation he just couldn't accept it. The scene was supposed to show how dire things had become, but the entire thing just felt unnecessary when it came to moving the story forward. But since Mrs. Bronson was married, this begs the question if her husband had died because of the heat, or was he already dead long before this whole thing started? The second scene that was cut involved a police officer coming to Norma's apartment after her grocery trip. He was going to be wearing a tattered police uniform and would tell the women that the police would be disbanding, it would not be offering any help anymore. The officer would also be the one to hand Norma his gun after realizing the 2 women would not be able to defend themselves if they came face to face with an intruder. Both scenes were cut mostly because of time restraints and budget issues, but you can read both of them in New Stories from the Twilight Zone. Serling included many of the teleplays he had written for the book, and because they're written, dialogue and extended scenes are often included. They can also sometimes be more violent than what's shown on TV. Like for instance, when Mrs. Bronson puts her face against the glass window, parts of her face are burned off in the book, whereas in the show, she is untouched. Same with the intruder who belts Norma across the face when he first enters the apartment. Anton Leader, most known for directing the horror film Children of the Damned, directed this episode. Even though they were filming on a set, Leader wanted things to feel authentic, like the actors were really in the situation. Seeing how the episode was filmed during the summer, Leader filmed the episode without the use of air conditioning, so the actors were really sweating. Now they were also sprayed down with water between takes, but a lot of what you see is them. Leader would also from time to time turn the heat on to make it even hotter, which he felt would get a more authentic performance out of his actors. Nearing the end of the episode, before Norma awakes from her sleep, her paintings begin to melt. This was done by recreating the paintings in wax on a hot plate and gradually turning up the heat. There is also an odd audio glitch when the power shuts off. Norma says current's off again, and if you listen really carefully, you can hear her say it again.
Current's off again.
This is due to something called print through, where part of the tape makes contact with itself and some of the magnetized tape will imprint and transfer over to a silent part of the tape, causing a very faint echo. This episode really wouldn't work without the performances from the two main leads. Betty Gard played Mrs. Bronson. Betty was born in 1905 and began on Broadway in Easy Come, Easy Go from 1925 to 1926. She started working in Hollywood in the early days of the talkies, appearing in films like The Lady Lies from 1929 and Damaged Love from 1930. Betty also had some bit parts in television shows like The Honeymooners and The Real McCoys. She passed away on Christmas in 1989 at the age of 84, and sadly at the time of her death, it doesn't appear that she had any surviving family members. Accompanying Betty was Lois Nettleton in the role of Norma. Lois was born August 16, 1927, and is an American-born actress. She was crowned Miss Chicago in 1948 and would begin her professional acting career a year later. She's mostly known as a TV actress, appearing in shows like Gunsmoke, The Alfred Hitchcock Hour, and The Mary Tyler Moore Show. Through the 1970s to 1991, Lois would also appear as a regular on the hit game show Pyramid. Lois passed away on January 18, 2008 at the age of 80. The Midnight Sun is a really good episode, carried by a strong performance from Lois. Despite how bleak the situation is, Norma does her best to keep her cool and not lose what little of her humanity she still has left. If you enjoyed today's video and would like some more Twilight Zone, well, I put together a playlist of all the other episodes I've done, and you can find that right here. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you think of The Midnight Sun. I hope you're doing well, and I'll see you right back here in the Twilight Zone.